We are approaching the end of November, and you know what that means. A lot of companies are going to try to convince you that you need to buy your way into inspiration by buying more gear. I think it's safe to acknowledge that they've gotten me in the past. Now, I do love these machines, and they have inspired me to do things, certainly. But I really think there's a big benefit in stripping away some of the technology and learning how to make things with, I don't know, putting notes together in interesting ways. As some of you may know, I've been working through composition cohorts this year where I teach these kinds of ideas about harmony and how to combine notes effectively. And one of the things that I've noticed through that process is that most of the people there are used to, or they have a background in starting with the sounds. That's how they typically come up with their ideas. And I think the biggest revelation of going through that process with them has been, wow, when I start with the notes, suddenly things like development and arrangement become much, much easier. By the way, stick around to the end of this video because I'm going to give you an example of a prompt, a compositional prompt. Really, it's all about constraints and how to use limitations to effectively find inspiration so you don't have to sit around waiting for it. That's going to be at the very end of this video if you want to stick around. It's the kind of thing that we do in the cohorts. I have a lot of experience approaching this from both directions. I'm classically trained. I started writing music with pencil and paper at my piano, and I just love doing it that way. Then later on, I got into synthesizers, and a funny thing happened. I sort of forgot a lot of that stuff that I knew about harmony, and I just started doing the same things that I heard everyone else doing with synthesizers. Having a looping sequence that didn't really feel like it was going anywhere, using the same 3-note bass line pattern that everyone else was doing, because I was listening for the sounds, and that is important. You need to go through that period of exploration, of learning the tools and what they can do. But at some point, you might want to move beyond that. At some point, I wanted to realize the vision that I had when I got into this stuff to begin with, which was making the kind of music that I wanted to make, that developed, that felt like it delivered emotionally the way that I wanted to, that wasn't just stagnant and overly repetitive. So this is a specific video for a specific person, and if that sounds anything like you, and you can relate to what I've just said, then you might want to try a different approach. Someone made the comparison in our last call as we wrapped up everything that we had learned over the 6-week cohort. They made a great point and this great analogy that when you use this approach, starting with a plan, it's more like filmmaking, where you have to start with a plan. No one would just call in actors to improvise a scene. Well, I mean, that's a very different kind of film. But if you are the director and writer, and you have a vision that you want to realize, you have specific words that you want your actors to say. Now, where this got really interesting in the conversation is someone else pointed out, sometimes the actors can influence what you write, or you might make changes, and that's where the technology comes in. So yes, you have to get to know your actors and know what they do well, what their strengths and weaknesses are, what extra things they bring to the table. But you would never go to your actor and say, oh, you've done so much with this, I'm going to let you write the next scene. Like in Breaking Bad, I know Aaron Paul's character. They were going to kill him off in the first season. And they loved what he brought to the character of Jesse so much. They said, we've got to keep this guy around. He is transforming the material that we gave him into something better. But what they did not do is go to Aaron Paul and say, that you're so great, this has been amazing. What would you like to do in season 2? What's your character arc going to be? No, they still guided his process, and it was a collaborative experience. That's sort of how I feel with the synths, with the technology. But the plan is still mine, because I have intentional ways of realizing it. Basically what I'm saying is if you know just a little bit about how to put notes together, harmony, thematic development, what is old has become new again, and these things will set you apart from the endlessly looping, filter sweeping, now AI slopping masses. In the world of electronic music, there's a lot of talk about happy accidents, and we love gear that kind of leads us into those happy accidents that all just work. Like everything is a sweet spot. Every knob you turn, it's like if you ever put your hands on a good Moog, you know that it's really hard to make it sound bad, and things that you try can lead to unexpected places. That's wonderful. The problem with always relying on a happy accident is, one, you're constantly trying to acquire more gear because you're looking for new accidents. And two, you spend a lot of time turning knobs that lead you nowhere. You're just guessing. Again, when you're getting to know your actors, this is part of the process. It's okay to turn knobs and not know what they do. I'm not anti-fun here. I'm just trying to help you get out of a rut. Because I like to finish the pieces that I start. I like to write with intent. I like to have an idea that I want to get across to a listener as clearly as possible. The most consistent way to do that I found is to start with the notes. This is why in those cohorts that I mentioned, we start with very simple compositional prompts where you are using limitations, constraints, where I give you a set of parameters that you have to follow. And by the end of it, you realize, oh, there's a lot more within these constraints than I realized. So a lot of the problem that I have when I start with sound design or start with a loop or start with a modular synth patch is that I feel like it's dictating to me what it wants me to do, and then I get kind of boxed in, especially if I'm letting it dictate harmonic progressions and things like that to me. That's why I like to keep my sequences and loops and things harmonically a bit more vague so that when I play, I can add the interest, I can add the shape, I can add the phrasing, I can add all of those things that make it feel like it's developing and going somewhere. And I think that's why so much electronic music, I'm just going to be honest and say it, is so harmonically stagnant. I mean, it just doesn't go anywhere harmonically. It loops and the progressions loop. And harmonically, they're not interesting. The sounds may be very interesting, and sometimes that's just what we want to focus on, so that's fine. I get bored harmonically. I like interesting harmonies. But when you start with even a simple compositional idea, suddenly the sound design and how you color it just becomes another variable for you, another way to develop the thing. You're not locked in to what the patch is dictating that you do. If you can craft better loops that don't center or telegraph too much, then suddenly you don't get as tired of hearing them, and then looping isn't such a huge issue that you feel like you have to break out of. That's exactly what I'm going to talk about in just a second. So instead of chasing new gear or that new plugin suite for inspiration, that does pretty much the same stuff as the one you bought last year and never use, what if you could create your own inspiration? What if you had just a few constraints, a few ways to combine notes that were really interesting and could spark an idea? And then, when you go to the synthesizers, you have interesting things to play or program. Good news, you do not have to be a theory savant for this. In fact, when I think back to studying composition with my own teacher, we never talked about music theory in my composition lessons. It's a separate process. It's a creative process, not an analytical one. You can start to craft your own compositional prompts once you understand how to use self-imposed limitations or constraints to your advantage. So I'm just going to give you an example of that right now. Here's something to try this week. Instead of trying to come up with a new chord progression or melody that no one's ever heard before, let's just take it step by step. Limit yourself to just 2 parts. That's 2 notes ever playing at a time. When one part moves, the other part also has to move. So they're moving together, either parallel or in contrary motion. Limit yourself to just 8 moves total. So I don't care if they're all quarter notes, all eighth notes, all whole notes. It's just 8 moves. It's an 8-step sequence, if you want to think of it that way. Use mostly stepwise motion. That's half steps and whole steps. Save leaps for points that you want to emphasize, or as an escape hatch to get to harmonies, how those 2 notes relate to each other vertically, that you find really interesting. They can never double. The moment you double, you eliminate one of your parts. You want 2 independent parts. Within each part, never repeat the same note more than once. So before we were looking at it vertically, don't share the same note. Now we're looking at it horizontally, linearly, within each part. Don't repeat the same note too many times. and don't end on the same notes that you started your sequences with. As you're doing this, I know you're focused on each move at a time and how it relates both this way, linearly as a part, and vertically, how it relates to the other part. I want you to zoom out and consider the phrase shapes that you're making. That's pretty important too. Do you want it to go up, have an upward inflection? Do you want it to go up and come back down? Do you want them to go in opposite directions and have this sort of arc? Do you want both of them to go down at the end? These are all things to consider. They are all intentional phrase shapes that you can have that will imply a different meaning musically. Do you see how much there is to consider with just 2 notes at a time? So why are you skipping ahead to try to write massive chords and melodies that have all of this ornamentation and flourishes? Get really good at doing the simple things first. That will translate as you flesh things out. By the end of this process, if you follow the steps that I just gave you, the tips, you should have 2 independent voices that feel independent. They never share the same note. They should feel like they are taking you somewhere because you haven't centered. Like if you drew a line through the center of your individual parts, do they ever go anywhere, or do they just kind of hover around that? Do they repeat the same notes too many times? They also haven't telegraphed, which means you haven't spoiled the repeat, if you choose to loop it, by hinting at it with the last notes that you end with. So that spoils then the beginning, right? It's just like a joke. You gave away the punchline too soon. Now, if this is all completely new things to think about for you, and you have never considered any of this information, that I think is the most important information that you will learn compositionally, I really think that you would enjoy a 6-week program where we go through these steps together. That's exactly what my cohorts are, and you can join the wait list for the one coming in January through the link down below. I hope to see you there.